This demonstration is to show you how to cut the extra pattern pieces you need in order to make a front fly zip opening, say on a classic pair of trousers or on a jean or any form of trouser which has a front opening. So, like this. So this is typical of a zip you might find on a pair of jeans. You've got the back tongue or placket, and then you've got the stitch line that comes down here to hold the fly piece back. Now when you're cutting something like this, you only need 2 extra pattern pieces. Again, there are different ways that people work. Now I've traced off the trouser block here and I've just added 1 centimetre seam allowances around it, and I've got a notch here to where the zip comes. There are 2 darts here which are also notched. So it's just a matter of tracing off the pattern pieces that are needed. Now sometimes people will cut their trouser pattern for a fly differently. Sometimes you can put an extra centimetre on here and step it out. You would only be doing that on this side of the trouser, not on this side. And what that does is it just means that when you put your zip in here, it gives an extra centimetre wrap. Now the trouble with doing that is that you have to make 2 front leg patterns. So it creates more work, but there's nothing wrong with working like that. Another way some people do it is sometimes this piece here, what I call the fly piece, which is bagged out along this edge in this case, some people just keep that on a fold. So sometimes you can cut your pattern with that fly piece joined on as well to this side of the pattern, and then that just gets folded back. Now that also means you need to cut right leg and a left leg pattern. I'm going to do it so that you'd cut 1 front leg and cut 1 pair. And when you work like that, then I have to make 2 extra pieces. I have to make the placket that goes behind, and I have to make the fly piece that gets bagged out along this edge here. So to make the fly piece, I'm going to place this centre front line on the grain. It's not on the perfect grain at the moment, but for the fly piece I want it on grain because I want it to hold. So I just trace off my pattern, and it's as simple as that. Now I've got to think about how wide do I want this stitch line. Again, that can become a design feature to how wide this stitch line is. On this particular little sample here, it's nearly 3 centimetres. So let's do the same. So here's my pattern. I've got a seam allowance on there, haven't I? Let's not forget. So I'm just going to indicate that. I've got a seam allowance on the waist. And then I'm saying that I want 3 centimetre stitch line. I'm going to use a biro now so you can see this a bit easier. So that would be my 3 centimetre stitch line. And then it comes round, normally it comes round to a curve. But again, it can be square. You can do a zigzag line here. This line is purely decorative. The zip is actually held in separately onto that fly piece. So this fly piece, this stitching line here, does not actually hold the zip. Now, on top of that, I need a bit of seam allowance. I've come to the notch where my zip is, and I'm just going to drop down a little bit deeper there so it doesn't get too thick and bulky around that point. So I'm just going to bring it down like that. And that's the fly piece. Now, depending on what cloth you're using, if you were using denim, you wouldn't want to interface this pattern piece. If you were perhaps using more classical fabric, if you're making a classic pair of trousers, you would probably interface or interline with fusible this small pattern piece, because that way it will hold this nice and straight and it won't flap about. If I'm going to make my zip on this side, I need to make sure that this is the right side of my fabric, because you sew it and turn it back. So I would mark on this side of the fabric, right side up, meaning that's the right side of the fabric facing up. If I was going to do my zip up the other way, then I would want to mark this side of the pattern right side up. Now that's the fly piece done. I'll just put that there with the trouser pattern. I will notch that. And then the other pattern piece we need to make this fly front is the placket, or the tongue that goes at the back. Now because it's on the fold, so it's double, this is double cloth, this piece, to give it some substance. A single piece of cloth would just flap around and wouldn't be held nicely. So because it's on the fold, this cloth, I'm actually going to cut my pattern on the fold, much like you might do for a symmetrical patch pocket. So I'm folding it down the grain lines. I'm going to right angle off at the top. Now how long do I want this this placket? I want it this length, going beyond the zip again and dropping down a little bit. So in this case, the actual pattern is going to measure about 22 centimetres. That includes my seams. I measured that from the top of my pattern, which included the seam. Right angle off there. And again, there are standard measurements for this sort of thing, but if you're designing your own garment, it's entirely up to you how deep you make this flap. You may have a waistband that's sitting on the top here, and it comes along to the end, and you're going to have a feature of 2 buttons or something, so you'll need a slightly wider tab coming on your waistband, because the end of this, just undo that, the end of this placket runs in line with the end of your waistband. So if you just want, if you want a slightly narrower one, because you just want a single button at the top, then make your placket slightly narrower. I wouldn't go narrower than, what have I done here? I wouldn't go narrower than 3 minimum. So I'm going to make this one 4. I'm going to make it quite a wide one. And then of course I have a seam allowance on. This already has seam allowance at the top. And then I also cut the pattern while the paper is folded. So when you open it up, you can lay it out on your fabric as an open piece. I would probably just notch where you need to fold the fabric. And that's the placket. Put the grain line on. And there's your placket. So those are the 2 additional pieces of pattern that you need in order to make a front fly opening.